Hello, I'm Brad Kelly, and you're listening to Method and Madness. This is a show about books, the people who write them, and the labyrinth to be explored between the words.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had his band. Listen while I tell you about a dream he had.
All right, so today I am joined by one half of the excellent books podcast, Bookclub from Hell, and author of the exceptional novel Tower, the great Jack B.C. Jack, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Of course.
I'm always stoked when someone reads something I've written, and it's really fun coming on people's podcasts. I'm so used to having people on as guests or to being a co-host.
Yeah.
So it feels like podcasting all over again, being a guest.
Sure, yeah. It's a different thing too, right? I mean, I've definitely been on both sides of it, and it's cool. It's a different energy for sure. I want to start talking Tower. I mean, I love the scope and spirit of this book, and there's just the flat out novelty. It's got this beautiful sort of heartbeat to it, and I love a lot of the imagery. And but how do you describe this book? If someone's asking you, and not, I know as a writer, you probably run into people every once in a while who sort of aren't readers, and you're trying to explain to them what your book. How would you explain it to somebody who is actually like an avid reader and might be into this? How do you describe this book?
I find it quite hard to put it into a genre, and I think every writer says this, probably just because they're a bit too close to their own work. I think it's probably science fiction or surrealist science fiction. I tend to say it is a surreal science fiction novel about a tower which is so deeply believed in, so deeply worked into the world around it, that it just begins to alter the world around it according to its own inhuman desires. And the main character is peripheral to this happening, and is really the story is about him trying to accommodate himself to this presence and this engine in the world.
I think that's exactly right, and I think you're kind of capturing all of the enough of the nuances there to what's happening thematically to generate some interest. It's so unique. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I mean, I had read, I don't know, the back. I don't even know. Is it on the back? I read some like blurb about it or small premise. If I knew you, and if I know certain books, I don't like to know that much about them before I read. It's like if I'm decided I'm going to read it, I'd rather at that point, like, don't give me any new information. Just let me read the book, and then I'll, if I can, I'll look into it. Or in this case, I'll just talk to the author. And I was so pleasantly surprised by how funny it is. I was trying to think of a way to like tee this up in a way that makes sense. And it's going to sound like a slightly backhanded compliment at first. I think this could be an incredible Pixar movie. And I don't mean this. WALL-E is like one of my favorite. Like, WALL-E is like a top 15 or 20 movie to me, like in terms of just entertainment, having great moments, having a great story, having a great concept with like original images that I hadn't really seen before. I think this could be I could see this fitting into that universe perfectly well, being super entertaining but also super smart at the same time. So you definitely did an excellent job in that regard, just maintaining that tone and that sort of vibe, and it being, again, really cerebral, but at the same time, the heart of it is this humor, the relationships, the insights, and all of that. So really, really cool stuff. I wanted to ask you, I'm kind of reading through this, and as a writer myself, I start thinking about these things. And I don't want to ask you the sort of lame question of like, where do you get your ideas? But I do want to ask, what was like the first thing in your mind about this book? Like, what was the first aspect or conceit or part of the premise, or what was it, if you remember?
I think I'm trying to remember which image it was, because I tend to write according to which images in my mind are most potent, and which feel the most fertile. I'm trying to remember the first.
Yeah.
It might be an image of ascending a gigantic tower as waves of people engulf a city bathed in yellow light. I think it was from a dream I had, and that's from. I think that is in the book fairly directly. Mm-hmm. I think it was that image, and I worked backwards from there to try to work out how that came to be.
I love that. Yeah, and I'm definitely familiar with that process. You get like an image and it just rings some bell, and then you're like, all right, what do I got to do to make this image? Like, what do I got to, what world context do I have to build around this thing so I can get myself to making that image, right? Yeah.
There are a number of those in House of Sleep as well that I found. Like plunging from the cliffs, I felt like it's a very resonant image that a lot of the book around it felt like its job was to support that important image, or at least to me, is how I read it.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I think a lot. I mean, I in talking to writers over time, I think that's how it works for a lot of people. It's you get an image, or you get a few images or whatever, and somehow that becomes it becomes something like the sort of standard in terms of tone or something that you're trying to get the book at. It's like, if I can write a book where this image makes perfect sense, then I will have done what I'm trying to do. It's a little bit maybe more of I think poets probably do that even more so, I would think. I think a lot of poetry is sort of predicated on that mechanism entirely. And like I said, and that whole thing about the tower, it works so well as this premise because you can feel it looming all the time. It's always there in the background, and it ends up giving a certain level of tension to the whole book. So I was really impressed by that. And like, I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but like, I did get about halfway through, I was like, oh, is he gonna pull off the sort of promise of this tower? Like, the tower's gotta, and he totally did. So, yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Nice work, man. Yeah. And again, I was really impressed by the humor of it as well. It was cracking me up, particularly the characters of Hat and Briefcase, which are an actual hat and an actual briefcase. I hope that's not giving too much away.
No, they appear pretty early on. That's spoiling maybe the first 5 pages or so.
Yeah, that's true. That is pretty early on. What is for you the funniest thing in this book? Like, what's the thing in there that you think is funny?
I think it's the high performers, because a number of my friends behave somewhat like that, and so I was just more or less writing them into the book and having a good time, taking their personalities and just pushing it to an absurd point. My sense of humor was arrested at 14, so I still find slapstick humor really funny. People falling over,
right?
And
right.
Also, there's a certain type of conversation I find funny. It's sort of that really glib Don DeLillo type of dialogue. When he's trying to be funny, and
right.
I was basically trying to do that. Those two things, man falling over and that glib dialogue.
I like it, man. It definitely works. There's like a thing. Well, first of all, the high performers also, I love them. Are you willing to like give that away slightly? Just what that is? What are the high performers?
Yeah. So I mean, for listeners who have any experience with corporate law or with certain management consultants, so there's a type of sort of corporate self-optimizers, and if you take those people and push them to a really, really absurd degree, you get the high performers, which are in tower. they're people. So maybe just a bit of background. When I say the tower is altering the world around it, it's doing so in a very, very concrete sense. The high performers are when boys reach maybe 13, 14, about when they hit puberty. Some of them, if they have some exposure to the tower, will begin to grow blue suits through their skin. Their teeth will become brighter, whiter, straighter, larger. Their hair combs itself into a part, and they all begin to communicate in the same way, to have the same personality, to have the same preoccupations. And they're this sort of decentralized single character. Like, they all have the same personality, just variations of it.
Yeah.
They go for morning jogs in packs. They are fanatically dedicated to working in the tower and to ascending its floors. They were, I guess, in some ways the comic relief characters, but I also wanted to make them quite sinister after a while, and then eventually quite likable.
Yeah. Well, they're definitely funny, and they're also a little scary, and I think they're scary because there's just enough of them that the average person can relate to knowing people sort of like that, or imagining somebody can kind of go in that direction. It's really interesting, and yet they're, like you said, pushed to the limit. They become almost absurd, but they're. I enjoyed every time they came on the scene in a passage. I was totally on board with it. I thought they were hilarious. How do you? So you mentioned this book. You kind of phrase it as science fiction. I think that's, I think it depends on how you define science fiction, sort of what that means, right? I mean, I think of science fiction as, and maybe to some degree these sort of breakdowns in genres and subgenres aren't really all that important anymore. I tend to think of science fiction as like, the world basically makes sense, except is sort of like ours, except you sort of bend a couple rules of science or technology, and then like everything about the world sort of rationally flows from there. It's kind of how I think about it. So I definitely think this has that. I think this is something, so it might go on a sci-fi shelf, but I think there's sort of, in a way, sort of more going on here. I couldn't help but think of, and maybe this is because it's like the only TV show I've watched recently, but I couldn't help thinking of Severance, despite Tower, I believe, coming out before Severance did, right? I mean, 2023.
I'm trying to remember when it came out. I think it was 2023. I started writing it in 2018 and put it down for a few years and then came back to it.
Okay, yeah. So, definitely not any influence from Severance. More, if there is a resonance, I think it's more something in the air to some degree. But just that, that sort of the positioning of the corporation in the characters' lives and sort of in the world that becomes this sort of totalizing force that has paradoxical influence on a bunch of different things. And then also something about the way that the characters kind of feel disposed to each other. I mean, we don't have a ton of characters, like it isn't a big cast of characters, but they all feel, it's this world that is, if you're a high performer, I guess it's a utopian world. And if you're not, if you're like our main character, it's something else entirely. I don't know. I just really like that sense of alienation without being totally dour about it, right?
Yeah. I didn't want it to be sort of straightforwardly pessimistic, because like you said, for the high performers or for the objectified, who are people who become building materials for the tower. So you might become a floor tile or a steel girder and crawl across the city or the world and reach the tower and incorporate yourself into its body. And they love it. They have a great time. The main character has problems with the world because he hasn't fully submitted to the tower. And in that submission, I think they really do find peace.
That's what's kind of chilling about. That's what's sort of interesting. Like, as AI has really like landed in our lives, I think there's some older visions in science fiction work that suggest that we're all going to be living under this sort of oppressive. It's going to feel oppressive. The situation is going to feel oppressive. But like as we're really seeing it, it's like no, it's like actually a lot of people are actually fairly enthusiastic about like the technological evolution of culture, and it's really like the people who can't get on board that sort of suffer psychically.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose the people who do buy in also, but like the people like me who don't totally buy in, I sort of tell myself, well, they don't really understand what's happening, right? They don't really, and maybe that's not, maybe I need to just buy in. Maybe I need to buy my Chat GPT license or whatever and just go full bore on this thing.
Maybe it's a lack of empathy on my part. I feel like that you inevitably run into the problem of a creeping nihilism or emptiness if you fully give over to that. There's something missing in the human experience, if you want to call it a soul or something else. There's an unmet need that is going to declare itself eventually, whether you're trying to anesthetize it away or not. But that could be my own predisposition to magical thinking. I like an embrace of irrationality. Maybe that's actually what when you were earlier talking about it being science fiction, but perhaps not completely. What you're picking up on, because I agree, a lot of science fiction is like it's very rational, and a lot of Tower is about how perhaps things are rationally explicable. In Tower, it's just no one knows enough to really say. Like there's
right.
A lot of the book is about how there are these incredible things happening. Like the main character is a doctor who treats souls, so images them as a radiologist might image your leg today. And it's not really known what they're looking at. They know what is imaged has some correspondence to people's behaviour. And they call it a soul for basically just a lack of knowledge or lack of any better ideas. There are plenty of theories about how the Tower operates, but people in the book acknowledge that those also actually don't hold a lot of the time. It behaves in ways that are kind of inexplicable for most people. So it might be that too. That irrationality is, I think, really important. Also really important just to the human animal.
Well, this is one thing I really liked about how you set everything up, because I think the tendency for anybody who's writing something in this sort of, broadly speaking, this sort of speculative realm is to explain everything, right? And not necessarily beat it to death, but like, well, I should convey to my reader how all of this stuff works. And I mean, I've gone in that direction too, and I guess you do have to explain some stuff, but there is a thing where it's like, I mean, as a living person, I don't understand most of what's going on or how most things work, right? So,
no one does.
There's a right. We don't. I mean, that's almost more interesting. There's a level of contriving the premise where if you sort of put too much detail on it, it becomes unfamiliar by how well charted it is in a certain way. So I liked it. I liked that I didn't really deeply understand. I understood the Tower enough to understand the effect it was having on people and its position and all of these things. But I didn't, I had no idea on like a technological level or whatever how this was all working, and I didn't really want to know. I'm curious about. I mean, Jack, this is the only thing that I've read by you. Have you had do you have other material out there? And mostly my question is, I'm curious about your relationship as a writer to realism. So, did you start working in realistic stuff? Have you always veered in this, for lack of a better term, speculative vein? What is your attitude about realism?
Regarding realism, so I like to read it. I like to read it with a caveat. I like it with realist books if there's the feeling that things could become weird, and whether they do or don't is less important to me. I think Dostoevsky is a good example in that his books are very realist, but there's always this feeling that if Raskolnikov was stalking around feeling depressed in his greatcoat and came across a talking dog, that I feel like it wouldn't be too jarring if it were handled as Dostoevsky might handle it. And I like that feeling of there always being something magical lurking, or just that possibility of something inexplicable happening. If something is very dryly, a middle-class bourgeois couple arguing in their bad marriage, I find that genre of fiction, which calls itself literary and somehow is not a genre, to be... It can be done very well, as any genre can be, but also, like every other genre, it's really easy to make it extremely boring.
Sure.
I guess it's a roundabout way of me saying that I like it, but I like there being a little window or a shaft of light of something magical, or the possibility of magic happening. I've tried a few times to write realist things, and it just always goes off the rails. It always turns into someone being eaten by a bus, or just something more interesting happening. More beautiful images emerging than just I don't want to say depicting reality, because depicting reality, it's like saying a wedding photograph is the same as a wedding. There's there's more out there than just this surface appearance that is often rendered in realism. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. It absolutely does, and I'm feeling some real resonance with that. There's a lot of my favorite books are realist. A lot of them aren't. There is sort of a thing where I kind of did realize at some point that like the realistic work largely doesn't. It's largely not that realistic either. It's not, say, breaking the laws of physics or something, but like a lot of times the situations that are presented, there's something sort of performative about them, or coincidental about them, or just so about them that isn't particularly realistic either. And so, that doesn't mean there isn't amazing stuff out there, but then there is also this like tendency that I think sometimes, like you said, the quote unquote literary fiction can kind of become a parody of itself at some point, where it's like, I get it. They're divorced and they're not happy with each other. And then they're going to they're either going to go off and have their own lives or come back together or something. And we kind of know that story to a certain extent. So for me, it's like, unless you're doing something really interesting with that, I mean, I'd rather just go off into speculative territory for the most part. Plus, honestly, as time goes on, life feels less and less realistic to me. I feel there's fewer and fewer things that seem sort of hidebound to like following the rules. So I feel like you might as well just lean into it if it's your, if that's your thing. Obviously, every writer's kind of got their voice and the thing that really turns them on when it comes to this stuff. But I think we're going to see, if my psychic powers are at all up to snuff, I think we're going to see just more and more speculative stuff. I think, there's going to be a sort of to some degree, a falling away of literary realism, except as a kind of nostalgic thing. But that's just
I think also just the world we're moving into feels less conducive to that. I mean, if we are going into a world which is going to be full of, not totally immaterial in a physical sense. I accept that, say, software is physically instantiated somewhere, but to the user, it's these immaterial AI agents, which, maybe it'll just be, it'll be a bust. But if they are very effective and have superhuman abilities in certain areas, we will be in effectively a re-enchanted world. We'll be in a place where there are spirits screwing around with your bank account or booking flights for you. And they'll be capricious. They'll be hard to understand. I don't see the future as being particularly conducive to that sort of po-faced realism, because it'll be unrealistic. It's you're talking about how in science fiction, oftentimes it's all rationally explained, which I normally have a problem with because it feels so unrealistic. I've worked in research laboratories where you're at the boundary of knowledge. You're trying to find new knowledge, and a lot of the time, say certain things that an experiment might not work, and someone else in the lab will be able to suggest something to you to make it work, and you ask, okay, why does that work? And they go, I don't know, it just did. Don't overthink it. Yeah, I find it's hard sometimes to suspend my disbelief when people just assume this inhuman knowledge on behalf of humans. It makes the characters no longer feel relatable or like they're the same species as me.
Yeah, I definitely vibe with that, and I liked that. And I think when you're dealing with sort of speculative fiction, I think one of the challenges that, just thinking from a writer's standpoint, is one of the challenges that can kind of present itself is you get this like premise, and the premise is part of the plot, right? The conceit of the world that makes it speculative is like part of the plot. And so you kind of need a character that has some degree of entanglement directly with it. But if it's too much, it doesn't work. Like, I think all the time, as like a warning to myself of, oh God, I'm sure you saw it. The Will Smith End of the World movie with the zombie vampires, I Am Legend. Did you ever see I Am Legend?
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that ages ago. Don't ask me specifics on the plot.
No, there won't be specifics, but it's a good example of this thing that I think about. And it's a fine movie for whatever. I love post-apocalyptic stuff, and it was at the front end of the sort of wave of zombie stuff that came after it. But the issue I had with it was Will Smith was not only the only survivor, but he was like the perfect scientist to cure the thing. He was both of those things, just like coincidentally. And we're like, that's not how this would work ever. You're not going to be
even if you're a gun scientist. Even if you're an unreal like biologist or geneticist or whatever, what if you did your PhD in the wrong subfield and you and you get to the cure and you're like, well, I don't know what this is.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so that's a challenge. I feel like that's a challenge with science. And Tower is kind of perfect because your guy does have the proximity to this stuff to be entangled in it, but it's not like he's the expert in what's going on. It's not like he actually fully understands. It's part of the movement of the book is him figuring it out to some degree. So you struck a really good balance there that didn't make it feel like, he's just this convenient vessel for you to explain what's happening. I really appreciated and admired that for sure. I want to ask,
thanks.
and apologies if this, I know we're for people who don't know, we are talking from almost exactly opposite sides of the planet, so I think we might have a couple moments of delay there, but I think we're making it work. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, and we'll talk some Tower too, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about Book Club from Hell, because I think Book Club from Hell is great. I think probably most people who listen to this show are at least familiar with Book Club from Hell. You and your friend Levi, and pretty regularly guests, but I think the core of the show is you and Levi picking a book. Sometimes it is like totally out there madness stuff, and sometimes it's the most recent one I listened to was you guys read Freud's interpretation of dreams, right?
Yeah.
Can you just tell me like a little bit? How and why did you guys start that show?
Yeah, so it started in early COVID, along with I think the rest of the algal bloom of podcasts beginning during the pandemic.
For sure.
Um,
Yeah, if during COVID you either started a podcast or you became an alcoholic. I think there's like
yeah,
two
it's
options.
one or the other. It's which way, Western man.
Right, exactly.
I mean, I'm pleased it happened because a lot of podcasts I still listen to regularly, like like Art of Darkness, Method Madness, like obviously was started much later, but I just kind of link it to that because I became aware of you during COVID.
Sure. Yeah, and I would be doing this show if I hadn't done Art of Darkness at all. So it's like part 2 for me. So.
Yeah, there are a number of literary podcasts which are really nice that started around that time. Anyway, we started it mostly as a way to stay in touch during lockdowns. And the idea initially was, and the idea has remained mostly the same, that it'll be a book club where we just read stuff that is bizarre or objectionable or is censored in some way. So we started out, I think earlier episodes are on things like Juan Posadas, who was a Trotskyite who thought he could talk to dolphins and talked about intergalactic socialist aliens. Ted Kaczynski, which I think basically everyone listening will know about him. Julius Evola, we did an episode on. Done episodes on Spengler, the Turner Diaries, Buttai. We basically read things that are we've expanded our horizons from just stuff that we thought we'd hate and that people say you should never read, which boiled down to mostly white nationalist stuff, and we're both just so burned out on that.
Yeah, you don't want to be doing that every twice a month, reading a white national. You don't need to do that.
The thing with it though is that you realize really quickly that once you get past the once you've suppressed your gag reflex, if you just read enough of it, you lose that the recoiling from it, and you just realize it's mostly shit. Like the Turner Diaries fucking sucks. It's just a bad book.
Right.
A better author would have made it more confronting. So we've expanded to things that are still really weird, but are just are less the sort of things that would, kill a family barbecue on a Sunday. So the Accursed Share by Bataille is a good example in that it's an absolutely bizarre. It's him coming up with an economic theory based on solar excess, which I love. I have no idea if it's true or not, and I don't think it's very important. It's a very beautiful system. And then, like you mentioned, a most recent episode on the interpretation of dreams by Freud, which I think it's a remarkable book. And although most, if not everyone, knows Freud's name, not many have read particularly his big foundational works like The Interpretation of Dreams. And it's really weird if you actually sit down and take the time to read it. It's a really smart, really weird guy trying to work out the structure of the mind based on interpreting his own and his patient's dreams. It's an absolutely bizarre project, and it's also wonderful. So that's kind of the evolution over time of what the podcast is and how it started.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to watch, and I appreciate both the intergalactic communist aliens episodes, and I genuinely appreciated the interpretation of dreams. You guys are, you strike that great balance of smart and funny and interesting, and I really do. If people haven't listened to it, and it's good because it's very much evergreen too. So just give it a scroll, and the first title that catches your eye, give it a listen, and you'll definitely learn something and have a good time. What are some books that are coming up that you guys are talking about?
Books coming up. So let me check. So we release in the end all our episodes for free, and then we've got a backlog of stuff up on Patreon that we haven't released. We've got the Transmaxing Manifesto coming up. Basically, if people have come across... the Transmaxers insist that they're not incels, but I don't buy it. It's if people have come across sort of black pill types who say that they're making themselves gay because they've been unsuccessful with women, so I'll make myself gay so I can have intimacy. This is like that, except the next step. You know, they'll take sex hormones and say, look, well, I'm going to make myself trans to find...
Whoa.
Basically because it's easier to live as a woman than as a man is the motivation. And that was just kind of a distressing read because it's just a deeply unhappy person trying to solve their problems in entirely the wrong way. Right. Then we've got Irene Idsley coming up. Yeah, which was much less sad. Irene Idsley was fantastic by Amanda McKittrick Ross. It's a romance novel from the 19th century. Ross was an Irish woman who, for her 10th wedding anniversary, her husband funded the writing and publication of Irene Idsley, which has the most insane purple prose I've ever read in my life. To the point where the plot is very straightforward, but there were many times where I actually just didn't know what was going on because the prose is so dense. She loves alliteration, and sometimes there'll be 4 or 5 words in a row, all alliterated. The way that she'll describe just mundane objects like eyes, she'll just have the most insane descriptions of them. It's a book that it feels like it was written by a crazy person, but crosses some profound barrier to becoming, I don't know if I'd call it enjoyable, but very compelling in that when I started, I found it quite difficult. And by the end, I wanted more because it is so singular, this particular prose style. It is crazy. Then we've got Sex and Character by Otto Weininger that that's me and Nina Power. I reached out to her, asked if she wanted to do an episode. Okay. She suggested Sex and Character, which is... Okay. I was impressed that she suggested this one. It's sort of 400 pages of some German idealist philosophy offering kind of a platonic justification for why you can't trust women.
Whoa,
and why women... Or say why the platonic ideal of woman actually has no existence, no internality, no memory, as in no sense of time or the relationship between events. It's a bizarre book that I think Nina came across when she was looking at online communities of I don't know if they were incels or MGTOWs or something in the manosphere. And apparently this book in the more esoteric corners of it pop up. The System's Neatest Trick by Ted Kaczynski. No. Kaczynski's good because he's an on-ramp to much more interesting thinkers like Jacques Ellul. Mm-hmm. He's really excellent for that because he writes very clearly and lucidly. And he's very open about his influences, and so he's almost a great. He provides really good reading lists, or provided. He's no longer with us.
Yeah, well, that sounds like some interesting stuff, man. How do you? That's you guys crank out a lot of episodes. I'm impressed by your reading schedule. To be honest, that's a lot of work, and. Particularly, like, a lot of it is, like, this, the Purple Prose book you mentioned, like, a lot of it is, I don't even necessarily want to say difficult, but I know Interpretation of Dreams is not a light read. I mean, that's
that was difficult.
I don't know if it's a slog exactly, but that you got to process that, right? I mean, he's not writing for the 2025 airport thriller audience. This is, there's some effort involved for sure. So...
It's a skill. I think we've just gotten better at reading, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. At least that's what I've found.
Yeah, no, that's been my experience too, and you just kind of have to commit to it, and you end up getting a process. There is something, and tell me what you think about this. I mean, preparing to do podcasts about these things and have a conversation about them, no matter how sort of pre-organized the conversation is, I find that, like, so I've reread some books for Method and Madness just recently, and I found that in sort of forcing myself to think about ways to talk about it or questions to ask about it, I feel like I understand the books at a much, much higher level than when my my initial read of them some number of years ago. It's like a cheat code for actually getting as much of this book sort of into your head, into your memory, but also into your understanding, and thinking about how various aspects of it you can apply to something else. I just feel like I'm reading the book like 3 times rather than once, just because of how how you're trying to sort of repackage the information. I guess that's not that novel of an insight, but I didn't realize how much it was going to enhance my reading experience doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. The difference is huge.
For sure, because you can definitely just read a book and not underline anything. I can't even imagine now reading a book and not like jotting some notes and underlining things or whatever as I go. I can't even imagine doing that now. So
yeah. Not scribbling all over it.
Do you find that helps your writing process? I mean, do you feel like the podcast and the writing sort of they work together? Do you feel like they one's trying to choke the other one out? How does that work together for you?
Probably they affect each other differently in different areas. So an obvious one is time, in that you have limited time, and podcast reading particularly does take away from writing time. And certain books that we've read for the podcast, I felt, just haven't helped me at all in terms of writing. However, other ones like Freud, like Bataille, I think there's just so much to them that they provide new images to chase and to try to unfold in fiction. Then there's just the more prosaically, the podcast is a great way to advertise books because, as I'm sure you understand, just getting people aware of them, of what you've written, is tough because people have too much information today. Like, you're just bombarded with informational noise, and so trying to cut through that and convince someone to read your book is really tough. And the podcast is good for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like one of, there are other ways I think to get the word out there, but it definitely feels like one that can certainly work. Are there, I kind of want to ask, I'm curious, like, let's say you weren't doing the podcast, how much do you think the books you're reading would look like the books you're reading for the podcast? If that question makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. There'd be fewer books that are just straight up silly,
right?
So, we did. So I don't know. I have a soft spot for self-published literature that I guess that you could consider bad, but has this anarchic energy. So we read Moon People by Dale Courtney, which, by basically any conventional measure, you'd say it's just not a great novel, but it's so bizarre, so oddly paced, and made with such obvious love that I find it very compelling. I'm not sure how many of those books I would read if we didn't have the podcast. There might be things that I just appreciate from a distance, but I have read a bunch of them now, and I think that's actually been beneficial. In terms of other things like Freud, or we haven't done an episode yet on Thirst for Annihilation by Nick Land, but I do really want to. With a bunch of books like that, I'd read those anyway. That we cover them on the podcast is just an extension of what I find interesting, and I think Levi struggles more with just really out there, particularly continental philosophy of just people just saying stuff. And building a model of the world based on just what I think, the world is an egg, and I love that. I don't really care if it's true or not. I don't think that's of primary importance, and so those episodes particularly are me pushing to read something very frivolous and very beautiful.
Right. Oh, I mean, without stuff that's frivolous and beautiful, I mean, I kind of what's the point in a way, right? It can't all be
Yeah.
it can't all be serious actually proving things. I mean, to me, for sure, philosophy is. I don't read a whole lot of theory anymore, and that's not for like it's not like some kind of ideological stance against it. But I always preferred like the more outlandish stuff. 'Cause it's sort of like, let's just go wild, and then I'll draw that down by 75%, and then I might have something that's actually sort of useful, but then I'll have also had fun while I did it,
Yeah.
Like the Nick Land stuff, I've read quite a bit of the Nick Land stuff. A lot of it is just wild. It's basically science fiction, a lot of it. And I can't even tell if he's right or wrong, but like, it's not, you don't read it because you're going to come away from it being, yeah. You don't read it being like, yes, this is accurate. This is Nick Land's vision is coming true. It's not really the purpose of it. There are aesthetic pleasures outside of rationality for sure. I wanted to ask you, I was kind of trying to think about books that were like Tower, and honestly, I was sort of struggling to come up with many. I mean, there's in general, I sort of get shades of some Philip K. Dick. I get shades of maybe some Murakami. I don't know, but what are some books that, outside of, or maybe outside of Book Club from Hell, what are some books that are important to you? Novels or not, I guess.
In terms of influence on Tower, The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov was a really big influence, and it's back to what I was saying earlier about that possibility of magic in realist settings being something I love, and that book's remarkable because he begins with realism and very, very quickly brings in that Satan is visiting Moscow for a week. And it doesn't take much time before people are flying over Moscow on broomsticks and attending Volin's ball on the Russian steppe. So I really love that because there's such a linearity between the realist parts and the supernatural parts. They don't feel different. They just feel like they are of the same thing. There's no separation, and I found that so remarkable and really tried to capture that. Then Crash by JG Ballard is the other one that was a really big influence, because there's in that book, particularly Ballard's mid-period of the Atrocity Exhibition, Crash, Concrete Island, High Rise, there's always this the situation that people find themselves in, and that situation could be something like the existence of a car accident, or living in high density housing, or being stranded on a traffic island. It always has its own internal logic, and the novel is basically Ballard just working out that internal logic in almost a mathematical way. And I found that really important in Tower, that you have this logic of the tower, and then I'm trying to work out what it means, because it used to be much, much longer, and I would have discussions on the effect of the height of the tower on property prices at various distances from it. I really like that. I think the book is much better because I took out those parts, but that elaboration of an internal logic from Ballard, I took a lot from. I think those two books, and then Kafka. I think everyone's influenced by Kafka inescapably, but particularly the castle. Just that idea of you always see the castle in the distance. It always looks different in the book. Like, you can never nail down actually what it looks like. He's always Kay is always chasing around people who are associated with the castle, but he never manages to catch them. Maybe it's because the castle was unfinished that he never went to the castle. I think the book would feel quite odd if he actually did go there. For quite a while, I was tossing up whether to have the main character of Tower visit the tower or not, and I won't say whether he does, but that was another big influence.
All right, on. Yeah, yeah, those all make sense. I just read Crash in the last couple of months here and was super impressed by it. It's such a. I actually talk about it a bit in my paywalled episode on Lolita, but like it's such a. Everything you're saying about it is right on, and there's also it makes me realize you talking about that transmaxing book makes me realize that like if the transmaxing book were a fictional book about somebody writing that book or something like that, there would be something similar to Crash, I think, in this like sort of living in this sort of post-industrial age, sort of bending all of our brains a little bit, and then getting a sort of idea latches onto you. It's not even an idea. I guess it's sort of an idea latches onto you, and then that becomes like entwined with your fate. Just like this book this other book you're talking about. You know, somebody gets sort of infected with this idea that they need to do this, and that bends their entire fate in a particular direction. Crash is sort of like that. It's sort of like at first you're like, well, why is this so arousing to everybody? And then like as time goes on, you somehow totally buy into it, and I sort of like expect to find people who are car crash fetishists out in the world now. I don't know if there are any. I feel like there must be, honestly, at this point.
There probably
I feel like
are.
there has to be some people. It's very sensual, but like one of the few books I've ever read that which the sensual parts, like I sort of fall for the sensuality of them, but I'm also disturbed by the fact that they're sensual, if that makes sense. Like I'm pushed and pulled simultaneously so effectively. I thought that book is just kind of a masterpiece in its own weird way, but also like not a book that I just like would hand to people as a recommendation. I don't know if you feel that way.
I like how exhausting it is too. How it just hammers this central theme and beats you into submission with it. And by the end of the book, you're pretty ready for it to be done. It's really tiring, even though it's not that long. And I appreciate that contempt for the reader.
And it gets all into sort of the medical component and the rescue components, like reenacting accidents, not only the accidents, but the rescue part of it. And really sort of like, it's weird. It's like, it's not only did he like suggest some new fetish you've never heard of, but it's like a whole constellation of interrelated fetishes that he's like promulgated on us, and they feel totally realistic at the same time. It's very it's really interesting. And then of course he makes the main character named Ballard, which like basically implicates him in the whole thing. It's really like it's really interesting. I have yet to see the movie. At some point I need to watch the film, but that's not like a date night. Most of the movies I watch are with my wife, and I'm not gonna. That's probably not one that I'm flipping on just to check out with her. So,
yeah, particularly in Crash, the promise of transformation, I find it's so engaging. You can't look away because the characters in it begin to almost they become initiated into this new language of a constellation of scars on a car accident survivor's body, or the bruises on Ballard's wife's face after she's beaten by Vaughn that he then traces himself, or the indentations on a quadriplegic woman's skin from her wheelchair. And these things are communicating in a new language to these people, and they are being transformed. And there's that hint of something even beyond what's said in the novel is so remarkable.
And I mean, maybe it's even trite to say, but I think it's so effective because the implication there is that, to me, like one of the things that Ballard's doing in that book is he's showing, he's exactly as you're saying, he's showing this kind of this sort of play out, but then I think part of what he's doing is like telling us that because we live in the sort of modern post-industrial age or whatever, the same thing is happening to us, but maybe not so dramatically. Like we're not all becoming car crash fetishists, but our brains are being like squashed and reshaped to like fit society over time, right? And so we're all becoming very, very strange. So as strange as a car crash fetishist might seem to us now, somebody from like the 1920s would look at a normal person now in the same way, right? Like,
yeah,
just as weirdly like dopaminergic, hijacked, and like, you know, they would. I think that's kind of part of what he's doing, and part of what makes it like super effective. It's like that they're super alien, but like I'm also super alien because I can even make sense of what's happening here. Yeah, it's Ballard's is absolutely brilliant. I need to get a little deeper into his work. I haven't read as much as I would like to. I've read Atrocity Exhibition, which is kind of mind blowing, and I need to get a couple more of his books on my shelf for sure.
Atrocity Exhibition is. I'm not sure. Go ahead. I don't know if I'd recommend it above Crash or not, because it's much more difficult. I like how mean it is. It feels like a truly vicious book, and how unfriendly it is to the reader. And it really doubles down on Crash's strange, sort of shattered language, and applies it to the entire. I don't know if you call it a plot or not. Just these strange repeating characters with similar names occupying similar roles in subtly different situations. It's a really remarkable book.
It is, yeah. Atrocity Exhibition is also, because of those qualities you're talking about, that sort of repetition, and that Atrocity Exhibition is one of those things that's like, I feel like if it were to go on like another 100 or 200 pages, it would probably make you a little crazy. That's the feeling I get from it, because it's sort of like I could feel it sort of like reprogramming. And Crash does a similar thing, sort of reprogramming my brain as I go. I feel like if it were long enough, I think I might. I think it might like actually break something in how my brain works.
Yeah,
it's an interesting book to try to like get back to normalcy. Yeah, so yeah, JG Ballard is really something else. I don't know if we have anybody like that now. I bet we do, but they're probably self-publishing or are on some small publisher. You know, I don't know that there's space. I don't know if there's space in the sort of the big publishing scene for a dude like JG Ballard anymore.
Yeah, it's very hard to say. He was a very odd man. I think he didn't he? I think he had an art exhibition at some stage where he had like beautiful topless women presenting crashed cars to people.
Oh no!
And
really?
was basically just observing how people reacted to this.
I know he's definitely, there's something of like the David Cronenberg thing to him as well, right? And you can definitely see that in Crash and Atrocity Exhibition, this sort of fascination with the body and sort of things happening to it or doing things to it in evocative ways, for sure, which is normally not sort of my lane. Like I'm personally like a little squeamish about the Cronenberg movies. Like I appreciate them, but they're frankly a little too much for me. Like I might be a little too parochial or whatever. So I have like a limited palette for some of that stuff at times, but it's an interesting direction for sure. So I think like the one thing I kind of wanted to ask you about, and this has to do more with sort of, you know, I kind of like to avoid some of the like typical writer questions, but can you tell me a little bit about, and I know I'm jumping all over the place, we talk about podcasts, we talk about Tower, but I was curious a little bit about like your writing before Tower, because like I said, this is all I've seen. So what have you had, what were your sort of projects or experience before Tower, and sort of where do you find your work now? What are you working on now, if you've got a project going on, and if not, sort of where do you see that going?
So in terms of projects prior to Tower, that was the first fiction I'd written since high school, because I just felt sort of creatively unfulfilled in my job, so I decided to try to write something, because I really like fiction. And think a lot of Tower, especially a lot of the editing of Tower, was just the effort to make earlier versions where I truly had no idea what I was doing readable. And I can certainly see the archaeology in it when I look at sections of Tower. Hopefully it's harder to pick up on that archaeology if you aren't as intimately acquainted with the novel. And in terms of current projects, so I've got a manuscript now which has hopefully been accepted by a publisher.
Hey, nice.
That's looking good, and that's about. It's in a similar style to Tower. I think it's a style that I naturally write in It's about a right-wing band that is so popular that they're effectively global government. That what they sing about is basically just uploaded into everyone as what they believe now.
Yeah.
And it's about the band, both the band members who start life just as basically just abstract fragments of consumer culture. It's a bit Hegelian in terms of how they and their audience recognize each other, becoming human beings, and going through that very painful process of becoming true human beings with internal lives. This is taking place against the backdrop of... I read a bunch of thriller novels, and I liked the... sort of how arbitrary a lot of the plots and the wheels in Wheels are, and I just decided to push that to an absurd extent.
Nice.
The plot is basically a succession of increasingly absurd coincidences. Is something a terrorist attack? Is something a freak barbecue accident which vaporizes a city block? It's unclear. Yeah. And then that's smashed together with Soviet era conspiracy theories. I met a few people from Russia and Ukraine who were telling me about how when they were growing up, there were there's the Duga radar is an over the horizon missile detection system in Ukraine, which was so powerful that it was known to radio hobbyists like around the world as on this particular frequency band. There's just this weird, they called it the woodpecker, this weird interference pattern. And people actually in the West started selling radios which tried to screen that out because it was just such a constant problem.
Wow.
And in the then Soviet Union, it was covered up because it was a military installation, but there were conspiracy theories about it being a mind control device.
Sure.
And I found particularly those conspiracy theories really evocative. And so there's a large element of that paranoia in the book as well.
Cool. Sounds
and then
awesome.
I'm writing something shorter. I want to keep it under maybe 25,000 words. It's based on Doha International Airport because it's a
what airport is it? Doha?
Yeah, in Qatar.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a remarkable place because it's so sterile. You can move thousands of people through it and they don't leave any residue. You've just got this faceless human liquid that's poured through it 24 hours a day. And nothing in the airport apparently changes. It's just completely indifferent to the humans within it. So I'm writing that. It's probably the weirdest thing I've written.
Have you passed through that airport?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds fascinating.
I'm writing a scene at the moment where it gives birth. So the book's getting pretty weird. I'm not sure how I'm going to market that one.
I love it. No, this is great. This is very, very, very imaginative stuff. I really like this direction. I do like the idea of trying to write something like a little shorter. 25,000, like the novella-ish length is kind of a cool. I know for me, like that, I'm working on something. I'm trying to do 32,000. It's like I'm trying to get it all in before that, and it's an interesting challenge for sure. Like you start getting really like well, I just won't talk about that entirely. I'll reduce that
Yeah.
entire aspect of this thing to one paragraph, and we'll just keep moving. Yeah, it's
Is that the novel? I think I remember you mentioning you were trying to write something and really focusing on plot and just making it move. Is
yeah,
this
that's what I'm. Yeah,
that
that's
one?
when we're. It's coming along. It's like it's basically like a cop noir set in 1930s Detroit with like possible demons involved. It's not. Yeah, that's about all I want. That's about all I want to say about it. Yeah.
I was waiting for the Brad Kelly angle to something that sounds way too mundane.
Yeah. There's like a surface level in which it's pretty mundane, and then there's like a lot going on that's sort of bubbling up beneath the surface. I don't want to say a whole lot more than that, but yeah. There's interesting. I think there's you talk about the Doha airport story and like what am I going to do to publish it? It's sort of this is where I think things get interesting. It's like I don't know about you, and I don't know about your disposition towards the sort of publishing industry, but like I've sort of decided that like at least in the sort of Barnes and Noble level, it's effectively dead, and so it's going to kind of live on in smaller publishers and people just putting stuff out themselves. And I think that's going to like open up possibilities for thinking about how these things are in terms of like obviously in terms of like plot and premise and stuff, but just in terms of like form factor and how it comes out. And you can have a 75-page book. That's okay. That's totally fine, or whatever. I think it's gonna be really interesting to watch how books as objects, and I hate to use the word, but also as products, sort of some of the constraints come off. It'll be interesting to see how that continues to develop for sure.
Yeah. It'll be fascinating. I mean, I don't write to a publisher or what I think would be acceptable to a publishing house. I'm certainly not antagonistic. Like, if one of the big five wants to put big five money behind me, I'm not going to say no. Go for
me
it.
too.
But
I'm not that punk rock. Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, I'm not going to change. Well, I'm not going to stop following things or images that I find interesting.
Right.
Just because it's not like it's not going to be a bestseller.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not in this for the money.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Which is in some ways liberating, right? I mean, it's just like I'm going to follow this thing because I think this is interesting, or I think this is. I mean, I always like to try and set myself sort of little challenges, just like that's something I haven't done before. Let's see what it's like to do that. So I think that's really cool. And I think like eventually, it'll be interesting. Like 25, 50 years from now, I think the whole sort of novel. I don't think the novel will ever go away. I think it's like a sort of permanent feature of the cultural landscape, even if the readership gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But it is going to be interesting to see just kind of what it looks like and what sorts of things become sort of fall away, because we're going to also have challenges from AI. It's like, well, AI books are going to be a thing. We might as well like I vacillate between total doomerism and totally like just whatever, you can't do anything about it. And I mean, people should just let the AI, if the AI is going to write books anyway, just let the AI write all the slop. And everybody who likes it will just do weirder and weirder shit. Like
Yeah. I think probably the best way to defend yourself against it is, don't write slop, because AI can write hundreds of thousands of words of slop in a minute.
Sure. Yeah.
And presumably in the future too, it's going to be able to tailor itself to an individual's taste. I mean, it's like the various recommendation algorithms are already pretty good at pegging what is going to keep someone engaged.
They are.
Some stack of that at an LLM to churn out, just like infinite romantasy novels is
right.
I'm sure that's a very soluble problem. I don't think that's going to be impossible to do.
Yeah.
If you want to write, if you as a human want to write books and have people read them, there's probably an important intersection between proving that you're human, which podcasts is it's good for that.
Yeah.
While sure, like you can I think probably even now you can generate a fairly realistic looking image of someone speaking and generate their voice and what they're saying.
Yeah.
I think if you got in and started podcasting before that became widespread, you can kind of claim that you're human.
Right.
And for that reason, I feel kind of I'm happy that Levi and I just chose to show our faces in the early 2020s, kind of without thinking it.
Yeah.
We've already established that we're human.
Yeah,
and
it's interesting. I kind of did the same thing. I was just sort of like, I never really thought twice about it, and then now it's like, yeah, I'm kind of, I guess, glad that I did. I don't know. That seems, I don't know. Yeah. You definitely you're an easy person to find. You know, it's interesting.
But then also writing not slup. Yeah, make it weirder, make it more idiosyncratic. Feels like where human authors are going to be able to survive.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think it's going to be just more and more important to because I also don't think that there's a lot of people that sort of say, well, like the AI will never be able to write as well as a human, and it's like, well, it's going to be able to write as well as basically every human. So I don't know that argument doesn't hold for me. I don't necessarily think. I think it will get to a point where the typical person wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a good AI and a good human writer. I definitely think it'll get to that point. So then you start thinking like, okay, well, how do you maintain some identity in that churn? Because there's going to be there's potentially fewer and fewer incentives for the human being to keep at it, right? So you're going to have to find sort of new avenues of expression that. I mean, the one thing, too, about it is, like, even if the AI can write the thing, the AI doesn't have the experience of writing, and I think that is something that comes across the page. Like, when, I read this book, Tower, and I can feel, on a certain level, you writing it, right? I can sort of, and maybe that's because I'm intimately familiar with writing a book, but, like, I can sense the wheels turning and the things being put together, and not in a way, like, that you haven't covered your seams perfectly, but I can just feel this is the product of a human mind exploring an idea and carrying it out. So I think that's going to be one aspect. I think that does come across in like almost like a magical way that the AI I don't think is actually going to be doing, because the AI is not actually having an experience while it's producing the thing. So I think that's maybe also a last bastion of sort of human value in this whole thing.
Yeah. There's also the cultural aspect in that what does reading culture or fiction culture look like in a few decades? And I think I'm actually quite optimistic about that, because already in, depending on what you want to call it, independent literature, underground literature, whatever, a lot of it is actually people who are writing and either self-publishing novels or getting them published through independent presses, reading each other's work. Mm-hmm. And within that kind of sub-community, I just don't see there being much of a place for AI, because so much of that is based on basically sharing your work and then reading the work of others whom you have some sort of relationship with.
Yeah.
Is that future going to be a future in which fewer people are reading or reading human works? Yeah, probably. But at the same time, that's a pretty nice community to be part of. If you are the sort of person who likes reading and writing human works, it's I just don't agree with that. I guess a fundamental or an unspoken assumption in our society that the greater market reach a thing has, the better it is. I mean, there's a lot to be said for niches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I get worried about, like, the one thing I sort of get worried about these sort of like secondary and tertiary effects of things, where it's like, if the AI is writing all of the, like, I think about sort of what I got into writing for, and I got very excited about it as like a young kid, and I got really excited about it reading books for adults when I was in like grade school, right? And I start to think about, like, if all of those shelves that Stephen King and Michael Crichton were on which were very commercial fiction, if those had been taken up with AI books written by AI, would I have ever got the germ that like, oh, I should do this too, right? And obviously I expanded outside of Stephen King and Michael Crichton, but I wonder, like, yeah, if I had been reading books by robots, would it ever occurred to me like, hey, I should do this? Or would it always just seem like that's a thing that gets printed out by a computer, customized to, do you know what I mean? It's like, yeah. So even though I did come to a point where I was like, yeah, I'm never going to sell 1 million books, and that's fine. It's cool. I like doing the thing anyway, and I'll read some obscure writers and all of that. I don't know if I would have. I'm not 100%. I probably would have anyway, but I do see that as being the entry point could become very different for people. So I hope that's not the case. Yeah.
Will it turn into something like metalworking or chess, or woodworking, where you go and buy a bed at IKEA? There's no question that it's been handcrafted.
Right.
But some people get into woodworking, but it's super niche.
Right. And maybe that's what it'll be. I mean, maybe that's okay. I don't know. I'm trying to maintain. I've realized that I can get kind of pessimistic about the whole thing, and I'm trying to look for sort of glimpses of hope and optimism about the whole thing. I mean, it's part of the reason that I do this podcast. Like, we were talking about Nick Land earlier a little bit. His sort of famous quote, "Nothing human survives the near future." And to me, I'm like, I think there's some truth to that, but to me, I'm like, well, I want to try to make something human survive into the near future. Some little thing, some little part of the world that maybe I can push along as everything becomes sort of Borgified around me. So,
yeah, I think also just, I mean, from a personal perspective, I'm going to be doing this anyway. Like, I'm going to be writing novels, so I hope there's an ecosystem or a group of people that can read them, because I care about that enough to publish them. If I truly didn't care, then I wouldn't bother about publishing anything.
Sure, yeah, you
so
can't pretend that you don't care about an audience
but,
at all, right? That's kind of
yeah. But I'm still going to be writing stuff.
Yeah, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, Jack, let's close it down there. I'll have links to your stuff in the show notes, but people definitely check out Book Club from Hell. How many you guys have? Like, you guys have to have over 100, well over 100 episodes by now, I feel.
Yeah, we've got over 100 now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's quite the catalog. There's some great stuff in there, and not only books like The Accursed Share by Bataille and Interpretations of Dreams, but you've also had a number of authors on from our little fiction ecosystem, and some of those are great as well. So, and also definitely check out Jack's book Tower. I'll have links to that in the notes as well. Jack, thank you so much.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Of course.